Hi, everybody. Welcome into another edition. This is Cross Functionality, the show connecting coaching, baseball, softball, male, female, hosted by former college baseball and softball players. Thank you for joining us today. Episode 52, as we talk today, tips for working with younger hitters. My name is Jim. Let me bring in my friend and co-host, softball national champion at the University of Alabama and current day renowned coach, Cassie Riley-Bosch. What's going on, Cass?
Thanks for having me. All is good. All
Tips
is
for
good.
Tips for working with younger hitters. Be sure to follow us on social media. Cassie always puts out good videos on her Instagram at Coach_CassieRB, on Instagram at Coach CassieRB, on Twitter I'm at Jim Tara, on both of those platforms. A lot of things to get to today when talking about working with younger hitters, and I think there's built-in confusion with parents when it comes to trying to figure out who their coach is going to be, who their kid's hitting coach is going to be next. And when you think about the younger kids and working with younger hitters, I think one of the biggest points that we have to talk about first is that hitters have not fully developed yet. And as a coach, it's your job. And again, this is for coaches out there listening, some tips today, how to work with younger hitters. It's part of your job to, I think, let those younger hitters between ages 8 and 10. I'm not really big on hitters, and unless it's a camp or something to get the kids out of the house, for hitters to be being coached at 5, 6, 7 years old. 8 to 10 is probably the ideal range, right? When you can get somebody to coach them and kind of get them a more privatized type coach. But when it comes to working with younger hitters, I think with coaches, you have to make sure not to mess up any natural type movement in their swing that could cause problems down the line, because some of the moves that are being taught by some of the more high-end coaches like yourself, obviously, those are some really taxing moves on the body. They're athletic moves. And if you don't have those natural elements that you were born with as a hitter in both baseball and softball, and that coach messes that part up, they could cause a lot of problems down the line going forward.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it. And I don't know where the misconception started to happen, where if, we have to solidify these perfect movement patterns sooner or else they're never going to happen later on. And instead we do the opposite, right? You're never going to get a kid to be able to achieve these Mike Trout movement patterns or what you see older athletes achieving. Granted, you might have that 1, 2, or 3-year-old that just steps up on Instagram and looks like he has a perfect swing, right? But that's not the norm. And if anything, that's just him expressing his athletic ability very naturally without being coached. I think what we can screw up is we can overcoach an athlete way too young. Like you just said, coach out that natural athletic ability. That screws up an athlete more than just letting them go and not having their swing look perfect and having them figure out certain things. As they get to that older range, like you said, that's when we can start to refine these movement patterns and get them into their natural biases. But gosh, before that, it is such a disservice to just be like, do this, do that, do this. Oh, we have to put you here. We have to set your arm here. That ruins the athlete, unfortunately.
Well, you mentioned in there Mike Trout and his moves. And if you look at his swing when he was in high school, just use him as an example. Well, we could take a Bregman, for example, too. When you look at their type swings when they were in high school, some of those elements that I think that of the natural movements that they have that were just naturally built into their DNA, that's still there. Some of the moves, though, that they learned and progressed through college in Bregman's case and the minor leagues in Trout's case, some of those elements were to make them and develop fully into major league hitters. Now, when you watch them, though, going back to high school, even going back in Bregman's case to college, and this goes for a lot of hitters, especially with younger Dominican type hitters as well, you look at some of their moves, some of those moves that they were just in there naturally, were there when they were 10 years old and are still there to this day. And you can sort of decipher as a coach which moves were taught to them to get them to develop fully. And that's a fine line that you're walking as a coach that you have to really figure out it for your hitters.
I really still think that's one of the hardest things on the planet. Is I was raised in hitting I got exposed to so many cool things through a biomechanics lab, through phenomenal coaching, through, all these textbooks, the emergence of people posting stuff online. And then I had to go look at hitter and be like, okay, but there's a reason her body is doing that in the first place. So So why is she doing that in the first place? Is that just where her strength lies? Is that how she exudes power best? And is it too late to really try to go backwards and change? Is she always going to have this little piece of movement that kind of is a little bit of a signature? I think of, even Derek Jeter too, like that iconic swing. You see him in high school and Little League, and Gary Sheffield. You watch Little League World Series video of Gary Sheffield playing at the World Series, and he still has such similar movement patterns as what he had as an adult. So who's to say that like you have to code every hitter to be identical? That's not going to be the case. Everyone's going to have their little bit of leeway. You're never going to have the perfect symmetry as a coach of being like, okay, I know exactly when to push a bias or when to correct an issue. But if you're constantly asking yourself that question, we can be better then, and we can hopefully not get to the point where we're just trying to make perfect swings instead of perfect hitters.
Yeah, and the emergence of everything online now has its good parts to it, and it has its negatives that are attached as well. But just focusing on the good parts, parents now at their fingertips, if they follow the right coaches, they can figure out what their young hitter, baseball and softball, needs to do, or what they can compare now. They have something to compare with, and compare and contrast with their younger hitter to big league hitters or to top college hitters, whatever the case. Now, I think going forward, though, with parents trying to pick these coaches, they have to understand too, there's certain elements to a swing that, like a hand-eye coordination, for example. There's certain elements to that swing that are really hard, it's tough to be taught, but also need to be sort of zeroed in on to help them progress as a hitter so you can get to that next step when teaching those mechanics.
Right. Yeah. And I think so much of the content that we see is based on movement patterns and the skill of developing the actual swing. But as hitters, as athletes, there is another skill, and that's the ability to read a pitch and that natural hand-eye coordination. I remember when we were thinking of topics a while ago, I had helped someone with a camp, and he purely does camps for 7, 8, 9-year-olds, which is definitely younger than what I'm usually used to working with. But I was so impressed at the thoughtfulness that still went into the training. And granted, from the outside, you see what the athlete is doing. They're tossing a tennis ball up, having a catch. They're just doing it with one hand, doing it with two hands. And as a parent, you might be looking and being like, how is this helping my kid hit? I signed up for a hitting camp. We're not working on the swing. But, there is so much thoughtfulness that goes into it because, gosh, again, you could have a beautiful swing, but if you're blind, you're not hitting. If you don't have the ability to track a ball, you're not hitting. Just that ability to see a ball in space, track it with your eyeballs, not your entire head. All those things matter, and it is such a great warm-up for younger kids. Not every kid is going to need. Some kids will naturally be able to warm up with this a lot easier, but just a tennis ball catch against the wall, tossing up with one hand and catching, having a catch with a coach, those things could make such a big difference for the hitter just interpreting a ball moving and having to try to hit it with a bat.
Yeah, I mean, what do we always talk about? I've said this a million times. I say it to myself, I say it to friends, I say it to family. Learn to catch, learn to throw. Catch the ball, throw the ball, right? Those are the two biggest elements in baseball and softball. Catch the ball and throw the ball. And a lot of it starts with the hand-eye coordination. I do find it funny, though, that, you parents, they sign up for certain things thinking their kid is going to hit and do all this hitting and swing a million times, and then they are working on something different that an advanced coach may have implemented, and they're saying to themselves, what did I just get myself into? What did I just pay for?
Right. And if you know what, the best parents are open-minded. You should be asking questions. You should be watching. You should be trying to learn. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think the best parents have an open mind approach to their kids' development. I think the hardest thing is when parents come in and they have a very one-track mindset and expectation of what their athlete should be doing. Yeah. It becomes very difficult for the athlete to grow with that parent expectation. And then I think it becomes very difficult for outside help to help the athlete as well. So as long as there's that open-mindedness to, okay, this person has had experience with athletes similar to my kid, and they may know something I don't because of that experience that they have, and we can at least give this a try and see where it goes.
Well, tips for parents with younger hitters too. You have to understand and this is kind of on the parent too, to do their homework. They have to understand if they really want their kid, baseball or softball, to play at a high level and to be a really good player, they have to understand the age where they're player is, where their kid is at that certain age, and understand the progression steps for certain age groups. You're not going to go into an instructor and tell that instructor or ask or request, hey, I want my kid to hit for more power immediately when they're only 8, 9 years old. That doesn't make logical sense. Now, you do have parents who do that, but one of the tips today that we should disperse to parents is don't do that. Don't try to make these expectations out to be bigger than what they are. Understand where your kid is in their development at that age, and understand they're playing different sports. They're getting a feel for their hand-eye coordination, and they're naturally moving at the plate. We can take those natural movements now and continue to progress into what we want them to be as a hitter when they reach their teenage years going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's not always going to look pretty. You might have, the biggest complaint I hear from a parent, they do it right off the tee and then they get in the game and it looks completely different. And of course it does, because hitting a ball off the tee is a completely different skill than hitting a live pitch. So yes, as you continue to train and get stronger and hone in on those movement patterns, the idea is that, can your practice swing look identical to your game swing? And I'm not saying that like you just have to let kids go do nothing. But you can't have this expectation that just because they did it well off a tee, it's going to show up in a game. That takes so much time. That could take years of development sometimes to start to see that come to fruition. And then especially like it might start to click and then the kid's going to grow. And we've had different talks about this as well. The kid grows and hits puberty and all of a sudden their body feels a little foreign to them and their movement might look a little different again. And it might take a little bit. It's just every kid is going to grow differently, progress differently, absorb information and produce it differently. And we can help them within the confines of what we know has worked and what we know can help them. But we can't have an expectation that it's gonna be perfect.
If you use the tee too much, that almost becomes like a game in and of itself, trying to hit off the tee rather than trying to hit live pitching. That's why I think that there has to be a cap, a limit on using the tee, and coaches need to understand that. I don't know how you feel about the tee. I'm not a big tee guy, although I understand the importance of it. I understand the value. But I think that for coaches out there working with younger hitters, we do have to be careful when using the tee way too much, because again, like I said, that could become a game within itself, and you forget what the main goal is trying to hit a moving baseball or softball.
Yeah, I think it's the intent, right? What's the intent behind the tee? Or do we have, some people say, well, I have a number I have to hit off a tee every single day. But what I would say is if you have a space to hit a ball off a tee into a net, then you have a space to do soft toss, you have a space to do self toss, you have a space to do bouncing tennis ball toss to yourself, like little things like that I think will just enhance the hitter. Because granted, you might not have access to moving pitching all the time, but even mixing stuff like that in would be extremely helpful than just having a static ball all the time.
Episode 52 today, tips for working with younger hitters. Listen up, coaches. This one is for you. Parents as well. Thank you for joining us today. Apple, Google, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. And be sure to email us your questions to jimbopodcast21@gmail.com. For coaches now, talking about the power of feedback. It's never been an easier time for that feedback to get from that hitter. If you're working with a younger type hitter, talking audio, visual, kinesthetic, the use of video. We'll talk first, though, about audio and visual and how those two elements right there with the power of feedback, how they intertwine with one another.
Sure. So you'll notice this with some hitters, and especially if they're let's say you have a group of 5 or 6 hitters, that you're going to need to show little bits of feedback to them so that they can kind of start to self-coach and self-regulate. And when I was younger, we used to hit basketballs off a tee, like little bit deflated basketballs. And I never really understood the keys to it. As I got older and I started to do research, I'm like, wow, there is a lot of value in hitting up against almost a static object at that younger age to reinforce those movement patterns. But the feedback that it does provide too, granted, some people will see something like this on Instagram and be like, that looks dangerous. You set it up in a safe environment, maybe an old punching bag. We have a sliding pad that's positioned in a decent area, and we put the athlete in a position where they're not going to hit anything else. They're not, we put tape on the floor so they're not too far away, not too close to the mat. And all they're trying to do is get their bat right behind the mat. Now, so many times young hitters will almost have a swiping swing, or they won't have that direct contact to a ball. And what this type of drill teaches is you'll kind of hear you'll hit the mat, kind of a soft sound, and then you hit it right. You hit right behind the mat, and it makes a very distinct sound, and the hitter knows, oh, that's the one. And you have any little kid, of course, a kid wants to smash something up against the wall, but so like you have them swinging harder, you have them, they're enjoying it a little bit. But what you start to notice is they move their feet a little bit, they go slow to the mat, they come back. Their focus and their self-regulating is huge. They don't. It's not like when they miss hit a tee and they look at a coach and say, "What I do wrong." They know how to figure out if they did it wrong. They can hear it. So things like that are huge. And then even sometimes we use tennis balls, we use softer balls, but the ability to, then this is little like feel as well, the sound and feel of a ball at a bat, like an actual ball. Like there is a time and place to use tennis balls and softer balls, but to make sure the hitter is still getting exposed to what it sounds like when they hit the sweet spot, what it feels like when they hit the sweet spot is huge with an actual real ball and not just a soft ball all the time.
So talking about kinesthetic now,
Mhm.
moving on to that, working with younger hitters and how a kinesthetic ties in as well with both audio and visual.
Sure. So, I mean, you're going to figure out the type of learner an athlete is too. You have some athletes that are going to gravitate a little more towards an audio type learning environment, some more of a visual. They want to mimic a coach. They want to watch video and mimic it. I mean, I laugh. I'm sure you remember Ken Griffey Jr. Slugfest on Nintendo 64,
Of
but
course. Yeah.
there was a season mode where you got to draft players. And I remember when I would go play outside with my dad, my grandpa, whoever it was, I would say, we're doing a draft, but you have to mimic the hitter. So, first up was Derek Jeter, and I would come in and I would mimic his swing, and then Sammy Sosa. And of course, I would mimic his swing, and then, you know what I mean? So, like all these things, it's funny at the time, but young athletes, young hitters watching and then trying to mimic is huge. That's like one of the greatest ways to learn. So anyway, you have this audio, this visual. The kinesthetic is really the feel. Then you have some athletes who are going to get really frustrated with the mimicking. They're not going to realize what it maybe feels like. And that's when you can have them close their eyes. You can have them go slow through a swing. Maybe you help them feel certain things and they're like, oh, okay, that's what that feels like, because they're just having a hard time doing it on their own. Or you add some restrictions. So you're trying to work on the lower half with an athlete and you say, okay, listen, we're not even going to worry about the step right now. I'm going to have you step ready and we're just going to focus on this little piece just so you can feel it a little bit. So you've added a little restriction so that they can be like, oh, I'm aware of that now. You don't run that into the ground. You don't do it over and over again. So that's the only thing they do. But just little restrictions so that they can start to feel things is very helpful for certain athletes.
So let me ask you then, how do you, as a coach, when it comes to working with younger kids, and we're talking here age group between the ages of 8 and 10, when you're working with those hitters, how do you, as a coach, get a better understanding of if they're a visual learner or if they learn better feeling, or if they learn better auditory? How do you understand them as a player and understand which way you should go as teaching them as a coach?
Sure. So an easy answer would be you kind of test out all three and you see, where does the frustration lie and where does something click. And I think you're never gonna. It's never gonna be someone who's like, oh, you're only audio. You're only gonna do these drills. You just keep it in mind. Like, listen, when they're starting to feel frustrated, this is a good drill to revert back to because this really falls into their wheelhouse. There was a study done forever ago, and this is something I've like just messed around with. And if a parent or coach is out there, they probably would find interest in this, where they took younger athletes and they realized that if you ask them a question and they look down before they go to answer, they're typically a kinesthetic learner. And if their eyes shift left or right, like when they're trying to answer, they're typically an audio learner. And if they look up before they went to answer, they were typically a visual learner. And it was it was just an interesting little study. I've tried it with some athletes and I'm like, wow, that actually fit the mold. And some athletes it didn't, but it's one of those things where it's a neat little piece of research that had in my back pocket that I always just think about every now and then. But yeah, you're trying to figure out basically where the athlete has a bias to. But you do want to always incorporate all three, and you're only going to do that by testing them out with the athlete, a little bit of everything.
So when it comes to, and all kids now coming up, when they're like 2-3 years old, they're using something with video. They're doing something visually with video. And that's just the times we live in with the technology. And the use of video as a coach for you, with not just younger hitters, but with older hitters as well. I mean, video has to be one of the key points in your teachings. It has to be one of the center points to where you can present to parents and say, hey, look, here's video. We use video, and the kids probably love using video. How can coaches out there use video properly when they're working with younger hitters?
Sure. It's a shame because I know a lot of great coaches on Instagram have posted some stuff they've done with younger hitters, and it's very easy for the comments to tear that hitter apart. It's like, oh, they're doing this and this wrong. How can you be doing this with the younger, um so it's not necessarily to post, although I prefer to post because I feel like if it helps one person, I don't care about anything else. But the other benefit too is the athlete is now watching themselves, and it's so cool to be like, hey, that's you, and them being like proud of what they look like, because you don't know what your swing looks like and feels like, and especially when they're frustrated and you show them almost in fast motion, hey, this is how hard you swung, this is how hard you hit the ball, what just little things like that. The sense of pride they get is huge. And I know we coaches sometimes fall into a boat of like, all right, video analysis, here we go. This is what we're working on. This is what you're doing wrong, blah, blah, blah. The first thing I always do is I show them their video, and then I show them everything they're doing right. Look at how well you're doing this. Look at how you're well doing that. Because I want that to be what they pick out when they watch themselves, especially at a young age. When they get older and they're a little more emotionally mature on how to handle failure, and they can go and look for some flaws if they want in their swing. But I want them to first get used to like, look at how well this is going. And then the other thing too is to be able to, you're going to see the most amount of growth and development almost by accident, just because they're kids that are growing. So it is so cool. It's not to be proud of yourself as a coach and be like, look at how much better your kid got just because it started growing. It's instead to say, hey, look at, listen, the hard work that they put in. I have an athlete that showed up at 8 years old back in, she's 14 now. And so I've worked with her for a very long time. And
so 2015-ish probably.
Yeah. And so I to go back and look at those videos, I was like, look at how cool this is. Granted, she would have hit the ball harder regardless to go 8 to 14, but it's just been so cool to see. I have, 6-7 years of video of her just improving like once to twice a week for the last little bit. So things like that are neat to have. It's neat to share with her and the parent. And then, so I, even though you might not be posting it, I would recommend holding on to some of those younger videos and keeping them in your back pocket, because they are fun to look at as the hitter does progress.
So as we wrap up today's episode, I do want to ask you final couple of tips, pointers that you would give to coaches out there in coaching younger hitters, because there is a huge distinct difference between coaching more than, I should say plural differences when coaching those younger hitters ages 8 to 10 rather than ages 14 to 18. So what are some tips that you may have for those coaches out there working with younger hitters and ensuring they would have a proper future going forward in both baseball and softball?
Yeah, sure. And you know what? I think you can have great coaches that aren't the greatest fit for younger athletes, and you have some great coaches who aren't the greatest fit for older athletes. They really resonate well in that one zone of athlete. But if you're a private coach, you're going to get exposed probably to a plethora of ages. So a couple things I've seen with younger athletes. Kid comes in not swinging hard, just really hesitant. Come to find out they got stung once or twice, their hand, and they're afraid of their hand stinging and getting jammed on a ball. So a scenario like that, we're mixing in when we go to front toss work. It's tennis balls until they start to feel really comfortable. And then when we mix in every other ball is a hard ball versus a tennis ball. And that's okay. We're not coddling by starting off with tennis balls. We're just, the athlete has had something that they are afraid of, and we need to just retrain their brain to bypass that fear that it's not going to happen every time. The other thing is athletes are afraid of the ball sometimes, right? They've gotten hit by a pitch, it hurt, and they don't want that to happen again, and whatever it may be. Again, what you might work on, hey, we're only working on inside pitches today. We're working on some tennis balls. And then what you can do too is mix in getting hit by a pitch with a tennis ball and just, starting to introduce and teach them, hey, this is how we take a pitch so it doesn't hurt as much. That's a valuable lesson to learn. I'm not saying set up the pitching machine like Happy Gilmore and start begging athletes, but
immediately what I thought of.
I know. I tried that with my mom in my backyard one time. I was like, "Can you feed the machine?" And she was like, "Oh, that one hit you." And I was like, "I know, that's what I'm practicing." And she was like, "I will not." She got so mad, marched off. She's like, "I'm not participating." Um, anyway, so those just, you're going to need a lot of different tools for younger hitters because they're going to have these different variabilities, different adaptations, different weighted balls, different weighted bats. I can't tell you how important it has been for me to have smaller bats, like little league bats, almost just for the athlete to warm up with. Because we think of older athletes, they're stronger. We can do drills with their normal bat, but most of the time, young kids have a bat that's too heavy for them anyway. So to have these progressions of, hey, we're going to do a couple of drills, so a couple of things that you can feel with these smaller bats, they gain so much confidence because they can finally do it right and they don't feel overwhelmed by the bigger bat. And then we go to their actual bat. So I just think our ability to adapt as coaches, our ability to have these different tools and change the environment for the athlete is huge. And then obviously something that we had talked about a ton in the last maybe it's 2 or 3 weeks ago was just there needs to be an element of fun. There needs to be an element of competition. The athlete can't just be at 8 years old in work mode the entire time. There has to be some type of competition or fun element to it, or else they're not going to get as much out of it as they can.
Well, be sure to subscribe to the Softball Strength Academy YouTube page to watch this show and previous episodes, Apple, Google, Spotify, back in the archives to listen to previous shows and episodes as well. Next week, episode 53, we're going to be discussing teachable moments for athletes of all ages, not just younger kids, but teachable moments for all athletes. Do you have anything coming up that you'd like to promote that we need to know about?
We still have the hitting library going, which has been a lot of fun to share with coaches. But what I would like to actually add is my assistant coach from Alabama is retiring after 25 years of coaching. She was there, I think, the second year Alabama softball ever started, has been Coach Murphy's assistant coach for 25 years, and she's retiring to move home to Louisiana to take care of her mom. So I have to shout her out because if anyone's gotten a chance to meet Coach Allie, she's just been a staple in growing softball. So I appreciate what she's done, and hopefully everyone can kind of enjoy. There's a lot of fun stories in the softball community being posted about her right now. So had to shout that out, at least for today.
Congratulations, Coach Allie, on a wonderful, wonderful career. She goes home with a championship ring.
There you go.
Championship and a bunch of wins under her belt. If you're a business and you'd like to do a podcast, please email us, jimbopodcast21@gmail.com for multimedia opportunities. All right, again, next week, episode 53, Teachable Moments. If you have any questions, email us, jimbopodcast21@gmail.com, and we'll talk to you next week.